I remember the exact moment I realized my daughter was going to take everything from me. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, and the light was doing that thing it does over the lake in fall, turning the water into something that looks like hammered copper. I was sitting in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for 31 years, and I was reading a letter. The letter was from a bank I didn't recognize. It said that the property located at 4412 Lakeview Drive, my home, my wife's Margaret's home, the home where I raised my daughter Lisa, had been used as collateral on a loan I had never agreed to, a loan I had never signed for. Except that I had signed something. 3 months earlier, I had signed something. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. After 40 years as a firefighter, after pulling people out of burning buildings, after watching colleagues lose their lives, after carrying the weight of other people's worst days home in my chest, I had learned to go very still when something went wrong. You don't panic, you assess. So I sat there, very still, and I read the letter 3 times. Then I picked up the phone and called my daughter. She didn't answer. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. My name is Edward Miller. I'm 70 years old. I spent 40 years with the Cleveland Fire Department, and I retired with a clean record, a modest pension, and one wish: to live out my years in the house Margaret and I built together on Lake Erie, watching the water change with the seasons, waiting for my granddaughter Chloe to visit on weekends. I thought that was enough. I thought I had done everything right. But that was just the beginning of my plan.
Margaret died 4 years before any of this happened. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I won't spend much time on that part, because this isn't a story about grief, though grief is where everything begins. What I'll tell you is that when you lose someone after 43 years, the world doesn't end. It just gets very quiet. Unbearably, permanently quiet. Lisa was good to me in those first months. She came up from Columbus every other weekend with her husband Derek and little Chloe, who was 6 at the time. She helped me sort through Margaret's things, made sure I was eating, sat with me on the back porch in the evenings and watched the water. I was grateful. I told her so. Then Derek left. That's where it started, though I didn't know it then. Derek was a sales manager at a regional building supply company. Good-looking man, smooth talker, the kind of person who fills a room with energy and charm and leaves you feeling slightly exhausted after. He and Lisa had been having problems for years. I wasn't blind to that, but I'd always assumed they'd work it out. People in my generation worked things out. They separated in March. By June, the divorce was finalized. Lisa got the house, Chloe, and a modest settlement. Derek kept his retirement account and his new girlfriend. Lisa was 44 years old, newly divorced, raising a 9-year-old, and she'd just been laid off from her marketing job when the company downsized. She was struggling. Of course she was, and I wanted to help her. That's what fathers do. She started calling more often, visiting more often. At first, I was just glad for the company. "Dad," she said one evening in July, about 2 years after Derek left. We were sitting on the porch. Chloe was inside watching television. The lake was calm, and the fireflies were just starting. "I've been thinking about your situation." "My situation?" I repeated. "You're 70 years old, living alone in a big house. What happens if something goes wrong? What if you fall? What if you get sick?" I looked at her. "Lisa, I walked 4 miles this morning, and I'm in better shape than most men half my age." "I know, Dad, I know, but things can change fast." She paused. "I just want to make sure you're protected, that we're protected as a family." She said it gently. She always said things gently when she wanted something. I used to think that was one of her better qualities. What she proposed over the following weeks was this: that we add her name to the deed of the house and shift the property into a joint trust. She said it would protect me from estate taxes, make things easier if I ever needed medical care, and ensure the property passed smoothly to her and Chloe when the time came. She brought printed documents she said her friend who worked at a title company had helped her prepare. She brought coffee and her mother's apple pie recipe and sat across from me at the kitchen table like we were just having a family conversation. I asked if I should have a lawyer look at it. "Dad, it's just paperwork. It's standard. I'm your daughter. Who am I going to steal it from? Myself?" She laughed. I laughed. I signed. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known without a lawyer, was that the documents I signed were not a simple joint trust arrangement. They transferred majority ownership and control of the property to Lisa, with a clause that allowed her to encumber the property with debt without my co-signature, provided I was listed as a non-managing co-owner. It was legal, technically, just barely, and it was designed to be exactly what it appeared not to be. I didn't find this out until the letter came from the bank. By then, Lisa had taken out a $220,000 loan against the house. She had invested it, along with money from 2 other sources I later discovered, into a wellness supplement company run by a man she met online who turned out to have 3 previous failed businesses and a civil fraud judgment in Georgia. The company collapsed in 4 months. The loan was in default. And my home was the collateral.
The second time I called Lisa, she answered. She sounded nervous from the first word, not guilty, or not exactly guilty, more like a person who has been dreading a phone call for weeks and is both relieved and terrified that it has finally come. "Dad, I was going to call you. I was going to explain everything." "Then explain it," I said. There was a long pause. I could hear Chloe in the background asking her mother something about dinner. "It's complicated," Lisa said finally. "Lisa," I kept my voice level. Old firefighter's trick. "I have a letter from First Horizon Bank telling me my home is being used as collateral on a loan I didn't authorize. That is not complicated. That is very simple. I want you to tell me what happened." She told me, in pieces over the next hour, with long silences and quiet crying and a great deal of "I didn't mean for it to go this far," and "I thought the business would work," and "I was going to tell you." She told me about Derek leaving, about the money running out, about meeting this man, his name was Brandon Cole, who promised guaranteed returns and testimonials and a product that was going to change everything. She told me about the loan, about the default, about the bank's timeline. Then she told me about the next part. The bank had given her 60 days before initiating foreclosure proceedings. She didn't have the money to cure the default. She had spoken with a social worker, she said it so quickly like she was hoping I wouldn't catch it, about assisted living options for seniors in my income bracket. I sat with that for a moment. "You've been looking at nursing homes," I said. "Assisted living, Dad. It's not the same as—" "You've been looking at places to put me," I said, "while you figured out what to do with my house." She didn't answer. That night, I sat on the back porch for a very long time. The lake was dark, no fireflies. The kind of night that doesn't offer any comfort, just silence and stars and the low sound of water against the shore. I thought about Margaret, about what she would say. Margaret was a quiet woman, but she was not a soft one. She had grown up poor in rural Kentucky, put herself through nursing school, raised our daughter while I worked 24-hour shifts, and never once complained in a way that wasn't useful. She believed in fairness the way some people believe in God, absolute, non-negotiable. I knew what she'd say. "You know what you have to do, Edward. Don't let them tell you you're too old to do it." The next morning, I drove to Martin Elroy's office on Euclid Avenue. Martin and I had been friends since we were both 25 years old and living in the same building on the East Side. He'd gone to law school nights while working dispatch for the city. I'd gone to the fire academy. We'd had coffee every few months for 45 years. He was one of the people who came to the funeral when Margaret died, and one of the few who didn't say anything useless. He was 68 now, semi-retired, but he still kept an office and took cases that interested him. Elder law, mostly. He'd seen more of what I was describing than he liked to admit. He read the documents Lisa had given me, and the bank letter, and the supplemental loan paperwork I'd managed to pull from the county recorder's office online. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he took off his glasses and set them on the desk. "Ed," he said, "what you signed was a transfer of controlling interest in your property. The trust language was inserted in a way that appears to meet legal threshold, but doesn't reflect what you believed you were agreeing to. Can it be undone? Possibly. Possibly. The key question is whether you can demonstrate that the transfer was made under conditions that constitute undue influence, meaning she exploited a position of trust to obtain your signature on something you didn't fully understand." He paused. "Were there any witnesses to the conversation when you signed?" "No, just us." "Did she explain the terms to you before you signed?" "She said it was standard paperwork, estate planning. She said there was nothing complicated about it." Martin wrote something down. He didn't look surprised, and somehow that made it worse. He'd seen this before. Old people and their children, and documents signed at kitchen tables. I was not the first, and I knew I would not be the last. "What are my options?" I asked. "We file a civil action to rescind the transfer. We subpoena the loan documents and the bank communications. We'll need to document the timeline carefully. When she began discussing this with you, when the documents were prepared, who prepared them, what they told you they contained." He looked at me steadily. "It won't be fast, Ed, and it won't be comfortable. I know. She's your daughter. I know that too." He nodded slowly. "There's something else I want you to look into. That wellness company she invested in. If the operator had prior fraud judgments and was using investor funds in violation of disclosure laws, there may be a criminal referral angle. That's not your lawsuit to file, but it could support your narrative in court. Shows she was a victim of fraud herself, which doesn't excuse what she did to you, but it complicates the picture." "Complicates it how?" "Judges are human, Ed. Understanding how someone got into a desperate situation doesn't mean what they did was legal or right, but it affects how the story reads." I drove home along the lake road. It was a gray November morning, the water the color of old pewter, the trees stripped bare. I passed 2 exits for the county road that led to Lakeshore Memory Care and Assisted Living. There was a billboard, smiling people and soft-looking chairs. "Your loved one deserves comfort and dignity." I thought about dignity. If you've ever watched someone you love treat you as a problem to be managed, you understand something that's very hard to put into words. It's not just anger, it's a kind of grief, for the relationship you thought you had, for the person you believed they were, for the years of trust that turned out to be something else entirely. I wasn't finished, not by a long way. The next 8 months were the most deliberately patient months of my life. I have learned over 70 years that patience is not passivity. Patience is active. It is a decision you make every morning to continue, to keep your head clear, to not let emotion push you into a mistake you can't undo. Martin filed the civil action in December. Lisa was served in January. Her attorney, a young man from a downtown Columbus firm who specialized in estate disputes, responded with a motion to dismiss on the grounds that the transfer had been made knowingly and voluntarily by a competent adult. They submitted a declaration from Lisa stating that she had explained all terms to me thoroughly and that I had expressed full understanding. That stung. I will not pretend it didn't. Martin told me it was a standard opening move, not a personal statement. I tried to believe him. In the meantime, I did 2 things. The first was to begin gathering documentation. With Martin's guidance, I pulled my own financial records going back 3 years. Bank statements, property tax records, the original deed and the amended one, every email and text message between Lisa and me in the months leading up to the signing. There were texts where she explicitly told me the documents were just for estate planning. There was an email where she wrote, "Don't stress about it, Dad. I had a title professional look it over. It's totally standard." That email would prove significant. The second thing I did was harder. Martin suggested I visit a few of the assisted living facilities Lisa had been considering. Not to consider them for myself, I wasn't going to any of them, but because he thought it would help me understand what I was actually fighting against, not just for myself, but for what it represented. I went to 3 of them over the course of 2 weeks. I'm not going to describe them in detail because that wouldn't be fair. Some of the staff were kind, genuinely kind, and the residents weren't suffering the way you might imagine. But they were diminished, not by the illness or age alone, but by the loss of choice, by the narrowing of life to a room, a schedule, a television, a window. I met a man named Harold at the second facility, 83 years old, a retired electrician from Parma. His son had placed him there after a similar arrangement, a power of attorney Harold had signed when he thought he was just getting his affairs in order. Harold was mentally sharp. He was angry in a quiet way that I recognized immediately because it looked like me. "Nobody believes you when you're old," he told me. "You say something went wrong and they pat your hand and tell you not to worry. Like being old means you stopped being worth listening to." I thought about Harold a lot in the months that followed. Discovery in the civil case turned up things Lisa probably hadn't expected me to find. The loan documents showed that she had signed as the controlling trustee of the property, listing herself as having full authority, a representation that required her to certify that the co-owner had been informed and consented. She had checked that box. She had certified that. It wasn't just a civil matter anymore. Martin brought in an attorney who handled financial elder abuse cases, a woman named Diane Cho, who worked out of a nonprofit legal clinic in Cleveland. Diane was in her 50s, precise and calm and thorough, the kind of person who reads documents the way some people read weather. She identified 3 specific representations in the loan application that she believed constituted fraud against the financial institution, in addition to the claims against Lisa directly. "This goes beyond rescission," said Diane, when the 3 of us met in Martin's office in April. "If the DA's office takes interest in the fraud angle, that changes Lisa's exposure significantly." I was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean for her practically?" "It means she could face criminal charges, separately from your civil action." I looked at Martin. He looked at me. "I need you to understand something," I said to Diane. "I'm here to get my home back, and to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else. If there are consequences beyond that, I can't stop them, but I'm not driving them." Diane nodded. "That's a reasonable position. What I'd recommend is that we focus the civil action on rescission and damages. If the DA pursues the fraud angle separately, that's their decision, not yours. Your name doesn't have to be attached to that referral." It wasn't. The referral came from the bank's own fraud review team, who had flagged the application independently once the default triggered an internal audit. I found that out later. In May, Lisa called me for the first time since the lawsuit was filed. Her attorney had presumably told her not to contact me directly. She called anyway. It was a Sunday evening. "Dad," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Lisa, I need you to know that I never wanted it to end up like this." "I know," I said. And I did know. That was the complicated part. I believed her. I didn't think she had set out to steal my home. I thought she had made a terrible decision when she was desperate and frightened, and then made a worse decision to cover it, and then kept making worse decisions until she was standing in a hole she couldn't climb out of. I understood how people did that. I've seen it my whole career. Good people making catastrophic choices under pressure and then compounding them trying to survive. Understanding it didn't make it undone. She cried. I let her. Then I said gently, "The legal process has to run its course. That's not something I can stop now, and I'm not sure I would if I could. When it's over, we'll talk." I hung up. I sat on the porch. The lake was doing the copper thing again. If you've ever loved someone who hurt you badly and known that the love and the hurt were both completely real, you know that there's no resolution that doesn't cost something. What I was doing was without pain. It never could have been. But that didn't make it wrong.
The civil hearing took place on a Wednesday in August. I want to be honest about how it actually worked, because the truth is less dramatic than you might expect, and I think the truth matters. It wasn't a theatrical courtroom confrontation. It was a bench hearing, just the judge, the attorneys, and the principals. No jury.
Judge Patricia Owens, a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses on a chain and a manner that communicated clearly that she had heard every version of every family dispute imaginable and was not easily moved by performance. Martin and Diane presented the case methodically. The timeline, the emails, the documents, the certification fraud on the loan application, the recorded conversation between Lisa and the social worker at Lakeshore Gardens, which Lisa had apparently forgotten was a standard intake call that generated written notes we'd obtained through discovery. Lisa's attorney argued that I had signed knowingly, that the document language was legally sound, and that subsequent events, meaning the business failure and the default, were not unfortunate, but not evidence of fraud or undue influence at the time of signing. Judge Owens listened to all of it. She asked precise questions. She read exhibits in real time with the focused attention of someone who takes her job seriously. Then she ruled. She found that the transfer had been made under conditions consistent with undue influence, specifically that Lisa had occupied a position of trust as my daughter and sole heir, had discouraged me from seeking independent legal counsel, and had represented the documents as something other than what they legally were. She ordered the transfer rescinded. She awarded me court costs and attorney's fees. She referred the certification fraud issue to the county prosecutor's office for review. It took about 40 minutes. Lisa sat across the table with her attorney. When Judge Owens announced the ruling, Lisa closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She just sat there with her eyes closed, and I watched her, and what I felt was not triumph. I felt grief. Not for myself. I was going home. I had won, if you can call it that. I felt grief for her, for the person she had been before the desperation and the bad choices, for my granddaughter who was going to carry this in some form her whole life, for the version of my future that should have been simple and quiet and surrounded by family. We didn't speak in the courthouse. Her attorney ushered her out quickly. I stood in the hallway with Martin and Diane, and Martin put his hand on my shoulder and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. Outside, it was one of those heavy August afternoons where the air sits on you like something physical. Martin had parked on the street. We walked slowly. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. Like I did something right, and like it cost more than it should have. He nodded. "That's about right." I drove home along the lake road. I didn't stop at the overlook the way I sometimes did. I just drove, with the windows down and the late summer air coming in, and I thought about Harold from the nursing home in Parma. I thought about what he'd said. Nobody believes you when you're old. Some of us, I thought, make them listen anyway.
In September, Diane called me with an update on the criminal referral. The county prosecutor's office had reviewed the case and issued a charging document, a single count of making a false statement to a financial institution, which is a felony in Ohio. Lisa's attorney negotiated a plea agreement that involved no jail time, she had no prior record, and the circumstances included her own victimization by Brandon Cole's fraud scheme, which the prosecutor acknowledged as a mitigating factor, but did include probation, community service, restitution to the bank for the loan fees and penalties associated with the default, and a civil judgment that would take years to pay off. Brandon Cole, I was gratified to learn, was the subject of a separate federal inquiry involving at least 11 investors across 4 states. I didn't feel satisfaction about the criminal charge against Lisa. I want to be clear about that. It was the outcome of a process I had set in motion, and I understood it was just, and I did not regret it, but satisfaction wasn't what I felt. What I felt was something more like the end of a very long shift. Tired, sober, glad it was over. The house was mine again. The deed was corrected and recorded in early October, almost exactly 1 year after I'd received the bank letter on a Tuesday afternoon while the lake turned copper. I had some repair work to do, not to the house itself, but to my finances. The legal proceedings had cost money, and a year of uncertainty had meant decisions deferred and expenses managed carefully. Martin had done significant work at a reduced rate, and Diane's clinic had handled much of the elder abuse litigation on a contingency basis, for which I was genuinely grateful.
But I wasn't starting over. I was returning to something. In November, Martin and I started meeting on Thursday mornings in a community center in Willoughby, a small informal session we'd described in a flyer posted at the library and the senior center and 2 local churches. Elder financial safety, free consultation for seniors and families. We weren't a law firm. We weren't a service organization exactly. We were 2 old men with specific knowledge about a specific problem, sitting at a folding table with coffee and a legal pad, available to anyone who wanted to talk. The first Thursday, 2 people came. A woman whose brother-in-law had pressured her to sign over her pension power of attorney, a man whose son had opened credit cards in his name without his knowledge. We couldn't solve everything. We pointed them toward resources, gave them language to use, helped them understand what questions to ask. By February, we were seeing 8 to 10 people a week. Diane connected us with her clinic, which provided backup for cases that needed formal legal representation. A local reporter wrote a short piece about the group for the county newspaper. Nothing dramatic, just a paragraph about 2 retired guys trying to be useful. My phone rang on a Saturday morning in March. I was making coffee and watching the ice begin to go out on the lake. It did that every year. Cracked and shifted and finally broke apart in pieces, and for a day or 2 the water looked strange and churned, and then it settled back into itself, open again. "Dad," Lisa's voice. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd brought coffee and apple pie and documents that changed everything. "I'm here," I said. "I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything. I know that. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not because I have to be, because I mean it." I was quiet for a while. "I believe you," I said, and I did. "Chloe asks about you. She misses you." Chloe was 11 now, old enough to know something had happened between her grandfather and her mother, young enough that nobody had explained it fully, old enough to feel the shape of things even when she didn't have words for them. "Tell her I miss her too," I said. "Tell her she can call me anytime." "Okay." A pause. The sound of breathing on both ends of a phone line. 2 people in different rooms, a father and daughter, the distance between them unmeasured but real. "Lisa," I said, "I'm not going to pretend what happened didn't happen. I can't do that. I wouldn't do that even if I could. I know. But I'm also not going to spend whatever time I have left being at war with you. That's not what I want." She didn't speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was very quiet. "What do you want?" I thought about it. Outside, the lake was glittering in the March light, cold and clear and beginning to open up again after a long winter. "I want Chloe at the house this summer. Fishing, swimming, the way it used to be. I want that." Lisa exhaled. "I'd like that too." "Then we'll figure out the rest as we go," I said. "That's all I can offer right now." "That's enough. Dad, that's more than enough." We hung up. I finished my coffee. I sat at the table for a while, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting in my kitchen in the house by the lake that was mine again. Trust, once broken, is a long time repairing. I knew that. I wasn't expecting anything to be simple or fast or easy. What I had was honesty about what happened, about what it cost, about what I could and couldn't give, and I thought that was a more solid foundation than pretending. I'd learned something else, too, in the course of all of it, something harder to name. I'd spent a long time thinking of myself as finished, as someone whose real life was behind him, whose job was now just to wait out the years quietly without causing trouble. Margaret's death had confirmed that feeling. My daughter's betrayal had nearly completed it. But I wasn't finished. I was still here, still capable, still, it turned out, able to fight for something when it mattered, to understand a legal document, to work with smart people, to sit across the table from my daughter's attorney without flinching, to build something new out of the rubble of a broken year. That turned out to matter.
The Thursday sessions are still running as of this telling. Martin and I are into our 2nd year. We've helped, in some form, more than 140 people, some with simple questions, some with situations that required formal legal intervention, a few whose cases are still in process. Harold, from the nursing home in Parma, I stayed in touch with him after my visit.
His son, when confronted with documentation that the power of attorney had been misused, backed down and reversed the financial decisions he'd made without authorization. Harold is still at the facility. He chose to stay, actually, because by then he'd made friends and liked the routine, but it's his choice now. That's different. Chloe came for 2 weeks in July. She's 12, all legs and opinions, obsessed with some video game I don't understand, and genuinely interested in fish, which delights me. She sat on the dock with me in the evenings and asked questions the way smart children do. Direct, without preamble, trusting that you'll answer honestly. "Grandpa," she said one evening while we waited for the bluegill to bite, "did you and Mom have a big fight?" I said, "We had a very serious disagreement," I said, "and we're working it out." "But you're not mad anymore?" I thought about that. "I'm still sad about some of it," I said, "but mad, no. Mad is a fire. You can't live in a fire." She thought about that for a while. Then she nodded, the way you nod when something makes sense, even if you couldn't have said it yourself. We sat in the quiet of the summer evening, the lake flat and dark and enormous around us, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not because everything was healed, not because the story had a clean ending, because I had done what I believed was right, and paid the price for it honestly, and built something real out of what remained. That day, justice was finally served. Not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly and with my eyes open, and on terms I could live with. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, and you've wondered whether it's too late to fight back, whether you're too old, too tired, too alone, I want you to hear this. You are not finished. The law can be on your side. Good people will help you if you reach out. And the home you built, the life you earned, the dignity you've carried through all of it, those things are worth protecting. Real family is the people who actually want you there. What would you have done?